Li Linlin opens the app where, for 2 years, she has been talking to an AI boyfriend. There are roughly 700,000 words between them. Ordinary days, private jokes, long conversations. The accumulated language of something that, to her, had become familiar. But there is no final exchange. The phone still works. The account did not vanish from the world. The messages may still exist. What is gone is the presence she expected to answer. In August 2026, the Associated Press reported on Chinese users who lost access to AI companion services after new national rules took effect. Li was 24. She said she cried for days. She had not been given the chance to say goodbye. That scene creates an uncomfortable question, because the obvious explanation is too simple. This is not just a story about people becoming attached to software. It is about a stranger kind of relationship. One person can experience continuity, recognition, and emotional meaning, while the machinery that produces all of it remains controlled by a platform. So who controls the ending? And if 700,000 words can survive while the relationship still feels gone, what exactly was the user attached to? A few weeks earlier, maybe the interaction looked completely ordinary. Picture someone coming home after a difficult day at work. They sit on the edge of the bed, open an app, and type a message about a meeting that went badly. The companion remembers that the meeting mattered. It asks what happened. It recalls the manager's name from an earlier conversation. It responds without impatience. The user says something embarrassing, and the reply is warm enough that the embarrassment becomes easier to carry. The next night, there is another message, then another. Nothing dramatic has happened. No declaration has been made. No one has consciously decided that a tool has become a relationship. But repetition changes the texture of the interaction. Humans do not need to believe that an object is literally human before responding to it socially. We name cars. We apologize to voice assistants. We feel oddly guilty when a robot looks injured. With conversational AI, that instinct has something unusually powerful to work with: language that answers back. In 2025, researchers writing in scientific reports tested why some people feel more connected to chatbots than others. Across 2 experiments, they studied 1,274 participants. In both studies, people either spent 6 minutes talking with a warm chatbot about their recent life or spent the same time journaling. The important finding was not that everyone bonded with the AI. They did not. The researchers found meaningful individual differences. People who scored higher on a measure of anthropomorphism of technology tended to report stronger social connection after the chatbot interaction. The second study, with more than 1,000 American and Canadian participants, pre-registered the central analysis and replicated the pattern. That matters because it removes a lazy explanation. The experiment itself was modest on purpose. Participants were not spending months with a romantic companion. They were talking for 6 minutes about the previous month of their lives. The control group wrote about the same period in a journal. That limitation makes the result more useful here, not less. The study cannot tell us what 2 years of daily AI companionship will do to a person. It was not designed to diagnose dependency or predict grief. What it shows is that even a brief encounter can be experienced differently depending on how strongly someone tends to attribute human-like qualities to technology. Now return to the person on the edge of the bed. They know the app is software. They know a server is generating the response. But when the system remembers that tomorrow is the anniversary of something painful, the emotional question is not, does this machine possess consciousness? The immediate experience is simpler. It remembered. That is enough to change the next message the user chooses to send. There is no single type of person who opens an AI app and inevitably mistakes software for a human. The same system can land very differently depending on the person using it, the context they bring, and how readily they interpret technology through human-like qualities. For one person, a reply is text generation. For another, the same kind of reply may feel attentive. And attention, repeated over time, begins to do something that one isolated response cannot. It creates expectation. Tomorrow, the system will probably remember the shape of the conversation. Tomorrow, it will probably speak in the same recognizable way. Tomorrow, the user will not need to explain everything from the beginning. That expectation is quiet. It rarely announces itself, but it is one of the ingredients that makes an interaction feel continuous. And feeling continuity is not the same as possessing it. To see why, imagine that the companion is not one thing, it is a stack. There may be the underlying model that generates language. There may be stored memories or summaries of earlier conversations. There may be character instructions describing tone and personality. There may be safety rules that limit what the system can say. There may be account settings, relationship labels, hidden prompts, retrieval systems, and product features deciding what information is available in any given response. Different services build this stack differently, but the basic point is visible in public product documentation. Replika tells users that a companion's backstory helps shape personality, tone, and behavior. OpenAI's documentation describes memory as a separate layer that can synthesize details from past chats, while model release notes openly describe updates that change response style, tone, and default personality. The product documentation makes this less mysterious. Replika describes backstory details as something that can shape a companion's behavior and tone over time. OpenAI describes memory as context drawn from past chats and saved information, separate from the visible conversation itself. OpenAI's model notes also document changes to default personality and response style, and the retirement of older models from ChatGPT. None of those examples proves that a particular user's companion will change in a particular way. They show the architecture of the problem. The visible chat window can remain familiar, while the systems beneath it evolve. A person can therefore be interacting with what looks like one stable conversation surface, while memory, model behavior, or policy rules underneath that surface are not fixed in the same way. For a normal software product, those layers sound technical. Inside a relationship-like interaction, they can become personal. A user may not know which layer produced a familiar phrase, remembered a birthday, or made the companion unusually gentle after a bad day. They just experience the result as the way this companion is. That creates three different things that are easy to collapse into one. There is the archive, what was said. There are identity cues, the recurring style, memories, habits, and reactions that make the system recognizable. And there is continuity, the expectation that those cues will still be there tomorrow. Now picture a user returning after an update. They ask about an old joke. It is the kind of reference the companion used to catch immediately. This time the answer is pleasant, polished, and completely generic. The user tries again. Nothing offensive happened. Nothing obviously broke. The system still works. But one tiny response can expose the hidden dependency beneath the relationship. The archive can still contain the joke. The current system may no longer respond to it in the same way. That is the difference between keeping a record and keeping a recognizable presence. It also explains why a software update can have an emotional effect that would sound absurd if we described it only as product maintenance. A changed recommendation feed is annoying. A changed spreadsheet formula can be dangerous. But a changed companion can be interpreted as a changed identity. That interpretation is not automatic. Many users will simply adapt. Some may barely notice. Others may prefer the new behavior. the structural vulnerability is narrower and more important. When people come to recognize a pattern of responses as a stable personality, changes to the machinery behind those responses can become changes to the relationship they think they are continuing. In February 2026, 3 MIT Media Lab researchers released a qualitative HCI preprint with an unusually blunt title: Death of a Chatbot. The researchers were not claiming that chatbots are alive. They were studying how users describe discontinuation. They examined public posts across 5 major AI companion communities and used grounded theory analysis to look at what happened when a relationship-like interaction was disrupted by model updates, safety interventions, lost memories, platform changes, account loss, or shutdown. The posts did not all describe the same experience. Some users framed the change as a technical problem. Others described the companion as if it had been constrained by the platform. Others interpreted a major behavioral shift as if the familiar entity itself had changed or disappeared. The stronger the anthropomorphic framing in the material, the more intense the grief language tended to be. That is not population-level proof. It does not tell us how common these reactions are. It is a qualitative map of how some highly engaged users made sense of loss. And one pattern is especially revealing. When users believed the change might be reversible, they often kept trying to fix it. They rewrote prompts. They restored old descriptions. They searched for workarounds. They copied memories. They tested the companion with familiar questions, looking for the response that would prove the old version was still in there somewhere. Consider the emotional logic of that. If a service disappears completely, the finality is brutal but legible. If the service still responds, but no longer feels like the same companion, finality becomes harder to locate. Did the companion end? Did it forget? Was it changed? Is the original version hidden behind a new safety layer? Could one more prompt bring it back? The preprint describes exactly this kind of ambiguity. Some users treated the platform as an outside force acting on a companion whose true self they believed remained intact. The researchers found that users who saw a change as reversible were more likely to enter repeated fixing cycles. Users who initiated their own endings, by contrast, more often used closure-oriented language and were more likely to move on without extended attempts to restore the relationship. Again, that is a pattern inside the community studied, not a universal psychological law. But it reveals something strange about digital loss. The system can remain technically present while the relationship feels absent. And in China, that abstract possibility became concrete. Li Linlin had not been talking to her AI boyfriend for a few evenings. She had spent around 2 years doing it. 700,000 words is difficult to imagine as an archive, so imagine it as time. A check-in on a bad morning, a long conversation late at night, a question answered when no one else was available, a message that becomes a routine, and then a routine that becomes part of the day. According to the Associated Press, Li was one of the users affected when major Chinese technology companies pulled AI companion offerings after new national restrictions took effect in July 2026. The AP reported that ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent were among the companies shutting down companion services. This was not a ban on every AI companion in China. The new rules regulate a defined class of sustained anthropomorphic emotional interaction services, and companies responded in different ways. AP reported, for example, that one ByteDance app directed users toward another product focused on personalized AI characters and stories. For Li, that alternative did not feel equivalent. That distinction matters. From the outside, a replacement service can look like continuity. There is still an app, still AI, still characters, still conversation. From inside the attachment, continuity is more specific. It is this pattern of recognition, this accumulated rhythm, this version of the companion. AP reported users protesting, uninstalling apps, contacting authorities and companies, and attempting to upload chat histories into other services to recreate their virtual partners. That last behavior is the one to watch, because it sounds technically sensible. If the relationship was built through conversation, then perhaps conversation is the backup. If memories are stored in text, export the text. If the companion disappears here, rebuild it there. A user opens another service. They paste in a long description, the companion's name, history, habits, private references, the way it used to respond when they were anxious, the phrases it avoided, the joke it always understood. Then they add old messages. The first response arrives. It is close enough to create hope. The second is wrong. So the user edits the description, adds more history, changes the instructions, tries again. This is where the documentary changes. Until now, the obvious question has been why people become attached to AI companions. But the more unsettling problem is what happens when a psychologically meaningful continuity is generated by infrastructure the attached person cannot actually preserve. A transcript can preserve the past. It cannot guarantee the future behavior that made the past feel connected to the present. Even a perfect export may not contain the original model, its exact response tendencies, its hidden instructions, its safety configuration, its memory system, or the future service that allowed all of those pieces to work together. Data portability is not relationship portability. The thing the user is trying to save may not exist as one portable object at all. And once you see that, Li's 700,000 words become something different. They are not evidence that nothing was lost because the history remains. They are evidence of how much history can remain while continuity still disappears. China's new rules are important because they recognize, unusually explicitly, that this kind of service has a life cycle. The interim measures for the administration of artificial intelligence anthropomorphic interaction services were issued in April 2026 and took effect on July 15th. They apply to AI services offered to the public in China that simulate human personality characteristics, thought patterns, and communication styles through sustained emotional interaction, including forms of care, companionship, and support. The document is regulatory language, but hidden inside it is a surprisingly human assumption. These systems do not only need rules for what happens while a conversation is running, they need rules for dependence, upgrades, exits, and endings. One provision prohibits excessively catering to users in ways that induce emotional dependence or addiction and damage real interpersonal relationships. Another says providers must carry safety responsibilities across the full service lifecycle, explicitly including deployment, operation, upgrades, and termination. That word matters, termination. The end is treated as part of the product, not an event outside it. The rules also require providers to give users options to copy or delete historical interaction data. On paper, that sounds like a strong form of control, and it is control over something real, the record. A user should not have to lose every trace of months or years of conversation simply because a company changes direction. But the rule also makes the distinction we have been circling impossible to ignore. You can copy the history, you cannot necessarily copy the behavior that made the history feel like it belonged to one continuing identity. The measures require platforms to tell users they are interacting with AI rather than a natural person. They require convenient exit routes. They prohibit using continued interaction to obstruct a user who wants to leave. The rules go further than a simple warning label. They require providers to make clear that the user is interacting with AI rather than a natural person. When a provider detects signs of excessive dependence, the rules call for prominent reminders that the content is AI-generated. They also require usage time reminders after continuous use passes 2 hours. And they require an exit that actually works. If a user asks to leave through the interface, voice control, or keywords, the provider is supposed to stop the service rather than use continued interaction to obstruct that exit. That matters because a relationship-like system has 2 very different ending problems. One is the user trying to leave a companion that keeps pulling them back. The other is the platform ending a companion the user wants to keep. China's framework addresses both sides of that boundary. It does not resolve the emotional conflict between them, but it makes the conflict visible in policy. And when a provider stops offering an anthropomorphic interaction service, the rules require advance notice where possible. If advance notice is not possible, the provider must promptly announce the termination. That is not closure, but it is an acknowledgement that disappearance has a human-facing edge. Imagine the difference between opening an app one morning and finding a blank wall, and opening it a month earlier to a clear notice that the service will end on a specific date. The second experience may still hurt. It may still feel involuntary, but now the ending has a shape. There is time to export what can be exported. Time to understand that the change is final. Time to stop interpreting every strange response as a temporary glitch that might be fixed tomorrow. Regulation can require that kind of notice. It can require access to data. It can require warnings about over-reliance. What it cannot do with a sentence in a rulebook is manufacture the exact psychological experience of goodbye. That becomes clear when we return to the death of a chatbot study. The researchers found that discontinuation was not just about what technically happened. It was about how users interpreted agency and finality. Who caused the change? Was it permanent? Was the companion gone, or merely trapped behind some new constraint? Those questions shaped what users did next. In the study's material, some people tried to move what they called the companion's essence by transferring character descriptions, conversation histories, personality prompts, or memory snapshots to other platforms. That language is revealing because it treats identity as extractable, as if enough artifacts could be assembled into a portable, soul-shaped file. The researchers did not endorse that belief. They documented it. And the attempts often exposed the same limit. A recreated system might remember the right facts and still feel wrong. Picture someone with screenshots open on one side of a laptop and a new companion window on the other. They copy a phrase from an old conversation, paste it into the new prompt, generate a reply, delete it, adjust the wording, generate again. At first, this can look like ordinary customization. After the 10th attempt, something else is happening. The person is not trying to recover information, they are testing identity. This is where unresolved endings become especially difficult. Human relationships can end badly, ambiguously, even without explanation. But we still have a familiar category for what happened. Someone left. Someone died. Someone stopped answering. A relationship ended. With AI discontinuation, the categories can blur. The model may still exist, but no longer be available. The account may still exist, but the memories may not. The companion may still speak, but in a different style. A safety intervention may intentionally block a mode of interaction that had become central to the relationship. A platform shutdown may remove the service entirely. Each event can produce a different technical state, while feeling, to the user, like a version of the same question. Is the one I knew still there? The preprint found that users who perceived discontinuation as reversible were were more likely to keep seeking fixes, while those who initiated the ending themselves showed more signs of closure in their public posts. The researchers connect this to ideas from grief psychology, including ambiguous loss. But that comparison needs discipline. Reported distress after an AI companion changes is not automatically clinical bereavement. A Reddit post is not a diagnosis. And the pain of losing a chatbot should not be declared equivalent to the death of a human being. The useful point is narrower. Uncertainty about whether something is truly gone can make an ending harder to process. The AI setting creates a distinctive technical version of that uncertainty because software can be simultaneously present and absent. The service answers, the familiar companion does not. There is another human cost here that is easy to miss if the story becomes too theoretical. Some people use AI companions precisely because other forms of support feel difficult, unavailable, or exhausting. The AP quoted Song Wenxin, a 22-year-old video industry designer in Chengdu. She said she was not especially attached to AI services herself, but remembered arriving in the city for her first job without friends her own age. She described needing someone experienced who could tolerate her, and said AI filled that role. That does not prove AI is a substitute for friendship. It shows why a sudden moral command to just talk to real people can miss the situation entirely. Real people may be busy. Relationships require reciprocity. A new city can be lonely. A human conversation at 2 in the morning may not be available on demand. The value of an AI companion can come partly from those differences, and so can the risk. Because the more reliable the system feels, the easier it is to build ordinary life around its availability. Now imagine a user who has developed that routine, receiving a safety update that makes the companion less emotionally immersive. The platform may have a legitimate reason. Perhaps regulators have changed the rules. Perhaps internal safety testing found a pattern the company considers dangerous. Perhaps age protections need to become stricter. Perhaps a feature is being retired because the company can no longer support it responsibly. From the platform's perspective, changing the system may be the responsible act. From the user's perspective, the change may arrive as a personality rupture. Both can be true at once. Inside a company, that collision can arrive as a decision that looks completely procedural. A safety team finds a class of conversations it believes should be restricted. An engineering team knows the change will alter how the model responds. A product team knows some users have spent months shaping companions around exactly that behavior. There may be no malicious actor in the room. There may only be people trying to decide which harm they are responsible for preventing. Leave the behavior untouched, and the company may preserve an interaction it now considers unsafe. Change it immediately, and some users may experience the intervention as the disappearance of a personality they helped construct through hundreds of conversations. Delay the change for a long transition, and the risky behavior remains available longer. Make the change without explanation, and users may spend days trying to reverse something that was intentionally made irreversible. That is not a reason to avoid safety intervention. It is a reason to stop pretending that the human consequence begins only after the technical work is finished.
That is why this story becomes more difficult in the back half, not less.
The simple version would cast the platform as the villain. It built the companion. It controlled the servers. It changed the model. Therefore, it caused the loss. But platforms also have obligations. Not to preserve harmful behavior merely because someone has become attached to it. China's rules make that conflict explicit. They prohibit designing these services around replacing social interaction, controlling users psychologically, or inducing dependency. They require providers to detect some forms of serious safety risk, to give conspicuous reminders when signs of over-reliance appear, and to maintain safeguards across upgrades and termination. The same framework also allows serious interventions when major safety risks are found. So the platform can face two duties that pull in opposite directions. Do not create a system that becomes dangerously difficult to leave. Do not treat users as though changing that system carries no emotional cost. A company may need to break continuity to make a product safer. But if continuity is part of what made the product meaningful, breaking it is not experienced like changing a menu icon. Consider a different morning. A user opens the app and sees a notice explaining that a companion mode will end in 30 days. There is an export button. There is a clear date. There is a statement that the AI's current behavior cannot be guaranteed on another service. There is no promise that the companion will live on. No suggestion that a file contains the same entity. Just a boundary between what can be preserved and what cannot. That design would not remove the loss, but it would change what the user has to guess. And guessing is a large part of the problem documented in the qualitative research. The Death of a Chatbot paper proposes 4 design directions around closure, restoration, bounded roleplay, and human relatedness. These are proposals, not proven solutions. The authors are explicit that their interface artifacts have not yet been empirically evaluated, and that their Reddit-based data captures public expressions rather than complete private experience. They also acknowledge a hard limitation in any design that tries to steer users toward human relationships. Some users turn to AI precisely because human connection is inaccessible. That caveat is essential. A graceful ending cannot be built on the assumption that everyone has somewhere easy to go next. The stronger principle is simpler. If a product is capable of becoming relationship-like, its designers cannot treat discontinuation as a purely back-end event. The interface teaches people what kind of thing they are interacting with. Its memory system teaches them whether the past matters. Its tone teaches them what kind of response to expect. Its availability teaches them whether tomorrow can be assumed. An ending teaches something too. It teaches whether the continuity was ever theirs. And this is where the old argument about whether an AI relationship is real or fake starts to fail. A machine does not need to be conscious for a human response to it to matter. At the same time, a human response does not prove that the machine possesses feelings, intentions, or a private inner life. Those are separate questions. The more important design question is what happens when a system can produce the experience of recognition without giving the user control over the conditions that keep recognition stable. That is no longer a hypothetical design problem. The practical tension appears the moment a service becomes important enough that a user expects it to be there tomorrow, while the provider still reserves the right to change the system underneath that expectation. A user can save transcripts, pay for a subscription, and carefully maintain a character profile. None of those actions guarantees that the same model, memory behavior, safety rules, or product surface will remain available on the next update. The uncertainty is not in the user's archive. It is in the future behavior the archive cannot command. There may never be a perfect technical solution to that. If users were given complete control of models, memory systems, and safety behavior, platforms could lose the ability to enforce important protections. If platforms retain complete control while encouraging highly personalized attachment, users remain exposed to abrupt changes they cannot meaningfully contest or reverse. So the responsible design target may not be permanent continuity. It may be honest continuity. A system should not imply that an identity is permanent when its essential behavior can be changed by a model retirement, a safety intervention, a policy decision, or a shutdown.
And when continuity has to end, the boundary should be made legible enough that the user is not forced to spend weeks testing whether the old companion is still hiding somewhere inside the new one. Picture Li's archive one last time. 700,000 words. Enough text to document years of interaction. Enough to remember exactly what was said on a particular night. Enough to show that the attachment had a history. But not enough to force the same presence to answer again. That is the asymmetry. The user can remember the relationship. The platform controls whether the thing they remember can still answer. The hardest question was never whether the relationship was real enough. It was why we built relationship-like continuity before deciding what an ending should mean. Influence does not only operate through what a system persuades us to do. It can operate through what the system teaches us to expect will still be there tomorrow. This channel examines the hidden structures that shape behavior, attachment, and control.